the US to essentially provide this broader digital twinning technology to the US.
Very interesting.
And if you look at, Supply Chain Magazine this month, you can read a really great article written by—
I read it every month.
Okay. Yeah, so Supply Chain Magazine this month, I believe it's IBM, talks extensively about it.
Well, maybe what you can do, because since you haven't been with us for a while, we have, we have an app, and you can share it on.
No, would be happy to.
Because I'll just show you some of the things that we're going to pop over. Some of the we've in our weekly briefing or weekly digest. Sorry, I highlight some of the things, and all these can lead to what we call deep dives into a subject. So if you have I'm going to move on to the briefing, but if you've got a subject that you're interested in or that can shed light on, because you're so the digital twinning, I will
digital twinning, and then the other one, I'll take, let's say 2 seconds, because we're deeply involved with the people like A.T. Kearney, McKinsey that we talk with regularly.
Mm-hmm.
For the next 5 to 10 years, you're going to see foreign direct investment, that meaning the inflow of foreign capital to the U.S. for investment. We'll start picking locations in the U.S. that are further along the continuum of climate change and preparing for being zero carbon based, and those that aren't, those metro areas that are kind of lagging and just either sitting on the fence are going to be the losers. So anyway, I'll shut up and let you get.
No, don't shut up. But those are good points to, glad I wanted to call on you because we haven't seen you for a while. So, just think about us. We've evolved the platform so that I was explaining to somebody where my lawyer, who's actually in Phoenix, or that just got back, calls it, we're not even planting seeds, we're just fertilizing soil so that you guys can grow. You guys are the farmers, and we're just providing the tools, and I'd love to see all these groups get together. And but just quick, we're going to transition. I just want a few updates. One is tomorrow. We wanted to learn, make ourselves smarter as it relates to the virus, the vaccine, and kudos to Bill Deukler, who's helped put together with Jonathan a group that will start off tomorrow, 11:30. One of you guys want to make, I don't know if Jonathan's on, but you want to just give a quick rundown of that, Bill?
Sure. So we've got a great lineup representing various points of view between Vishal, who is he's an Oxford degreed virologist who has been very involved in investing in the space for a while. A good friend and relation of mine, Dr. Tom Prince, who's the executive director, medical director here in Orange County, Florida, who's been on the front lines of the COVID effort, here, and can really speak, to a very practical understanding of what's going on the ground. And then actually a long time or long ago connection of mine that recently got rekindled, Steve Cucchiaro, who runs an investment firm out of Boston, but also is involved in a medical statistics nonprofit that has been tracking COVID for quite a while, and it's very knowledgeable in terms of what it looks like from a statistical basis. So I think it's going to be a really packed 90 minutes, and hope all of you can join because I'm hopeful that there will be a lot of illumination that comes out of our discussion.
No, it's going to be great. Thank you, Bill. And we had a quick call this morning, and I'll be in touch with you. A few more prep things to have, and then another one that's come along. I don't know if Zach's on. Zach Nasser, looks like no, but he put together an interesting panel as we launch a number of things. This is our philanthropy sort of catalyst event. Rob Horowitz focused on foster care. Mamadou has been a number of NGOs active in the World Economic Forum. Nicole on amputee athletes, and Charles on sort of community development. So that's going to be an interesting one. That's next Tuesday. So right after this briefing. Again, some of the interesting takeaways from last week. Thanks to Stephen Burke for having Edward Yardeni on, and if you haven't, there's his research. You can subscribe for it at least for 4 weeks for free. Just all these charts, you get them every day, and he's obviously a little bullish on the V-shaped economy, but he showers us with data. When Candace Beaumont talked about the death rate, the monthly death rate, he had a chart for it. So it's good to have people like him. Then the next day we had Chris Curtin, the Visa Chief Marketing Officer, and I asked everybody on the screen, who was your best and worst deal or decision? And he was coming into 2020, they had the Olympics, they had the World Cup, all these in-person events. But it turns out he was, if you watch the recording, he was very bullish on how the world is coming. Instead of you going to the event is coming to you, and how Visa is transitioning in that way. And then, yeah, I talked about these two events. These are some interesting things on the app. Joe put a great event here as well. And I think, Joe, I sent that recording to our compliance. Hopefully we get that out. Let's you and I coordinate, because that was a great fireside chat you put together. And then otherwise, yeah, you got the calendar. I'm going to transition over to you, Stephen, and maybe Stephen, you could also introduce Nitin.
Or give me the screen.
Yep.
Thanks. Start at the beginning. All right, thanks and good morning, or good afternoon, wherever you are, since we have people from all over. I wanted to introduce my partner, Nitin Sacheti, who joined us just recently. Nitin has spent time with a number of high-quality investment organizations, including Tiger, one of the Tiger offshoots. He also has run a long-short strategy focusing on the TMT space, and he's going to be sharing some thoughts on the 5G transition. So I think we get some interesting insights out of there, and it's a topic that is absolutely critical to the future. With all the focus on the election, we think that people might be missing a bigger picture. So I want to just out some of those transformations. Then Nitin's going to share some thoughts on 5G. Before we do, though, I had put this slide up back in April, and it was from the San Francisco Fed did a report on past pandemics. And what I wanted to highlight, just for managing expectations for people, if you go back to the Spanish flu back in 2018, it really started in the first quarter of that year. But as you can see from the chart, over 100 million deaths, but it was continuing on into 1920. So I guess my point here is I think we have to make some adjustments to, particularly as it looks like getting vaccines and other treatments are several months off still, to have them in the quality and the quantity to help address the pandemic. So I think what's going on is more normal than we might think in terms of dealing with pandemics. They do take time, and it was just interesting reviewing the 15 pandemics that had over 100,000 deaths. They don't end quickly. So there's an adjustment period we have to just keep in mind as we go forward. I want to just touch on 5 critical transitions, and I'm going to turn it over to my partner, Nitin, to talk about the 5G. So, let's just start. The first one's a political transition. It's really political and geopolitical. And what we're seeing is we've had these big swings from the far right to the far left in country after country as everyone's looking for the right answer. We think those things are going to continue. And we've been lacking more of a middle orientation around the world. But this is a big area that we think is going to continue to play out with swings between this autocratic kind of leadership and more socialist-oriented leaderships, and where's the pendulum going to end up? And we've gone through those swings before. Its leadership role, China take a more assertive approach, transitioning on in the Middle East in terms of alliances and allegiances, and then you have the other geopolitical issues that are well known, both in Europe with Russia and then also Brexit, and add to that shifting alliances in the Middle East. A lot going on there. From a monetary and fiscal transformation, this is a fascinating area when you think about it, because we're right in the throes of it. But historically, low interest rates were designed as a temporary measure, and now they've become semi-permanent. And we think the implications of that are quite big. It lowers the cap rates and lowers the return expectations around the world. But then you also have an element, or how many countries fall into what's gone on with Japan, where you have decades of low interest rates, and how do you get out of it? And then you also have the fiscal transformation that's going on, where particularly in Europe, you've had very much a bias towards austerity and not towards deficit spending. And you've seen both in Europe and also in the US with the Republicans, a much more orientation to deficit spending to deal with the problem that we're in. We think that's a significant mind shift, as we're looking at a $3.1 trillion deficit in the US right now, and with the additional stimulus sure to go up. So this is a big transformation that's going on too. Then you look at the social and societal ones, and from a social, think about the changes in just 6 short months to how we live, learn, work, where we live and all that. Those issues are major ones, and they're coming. And then you add to that the comment that was just made earlier about new dollars are going to come into areas that are more climate oriented, and we can touch on that climate transition as well in a minute. From a societal one, we're dealing with income inequality, which means we have to really focus on areas that are going to have much greater opportunities of equality of opportunity. That relies heavily on education, but we're also seeing the need to transform our healthcare for society benefit, as well as dealing with the social unrest that's an offshoot of all the above. Finally, we have the climate transformation that is, it should have been getting more attention, but I think like many of these transformations, people acknowledge that they're going on, but they don't invest for them. They don't take them act as aggressively as they should. But we think the climate one is real, and you're seeing it in sea temperatures. You're seeing it in the decline in the ice caps. You're seeing it in the storms, the fires, go through the list. It has real economic and social impacts, and things are going to have to be addressed there. And then finally, the digital transformation that's been going on. Another one that we think continues to be underestimated, even with the pandemic, because I think people look very short term. These are secular issues that are going to be addressed all over the world, and we think have big implications. And we're writing about this in our next Outlook that should be coming out in the next week or two. With that, I'd like to turn it over to my partner, Nitin Sacheti, to talk about 5G. And Nitin, just give me the heads up when you want me to advance.
Okay, thanks, Stephen. So I mean, just starting with the slide that we're on now, just talking briefly, as Stephen mentioned earlier, we think evolution of computing, and we just think the infrastructure around data intensity and broadband will increase over time. And this first chart really looks at kind of transistors per chip. So that's effectively, the density or the compute functionality in a semiconductor chip. And we see that, technology is getting smaller with Moore's law. It's happened for 40 years and, or 50 years as shown in the slide. And, with that, compute intensity has been getting better. So the new chip that's in the iPhone that was just announced last week, that chip has about 35% more compute functionality than, the past generation chip. And so part of the reason for the increase in broadband and sort of, the enabling of something like a high throughput 5G network is because, compute functionality is increasing, and there's a real need for there's a real need for faster broadband to enable some of the technologies that you can do with, more efficient compute functionality. And, that's sort of my speaking to the second chart here, where when you think about broadband demands, when we've moved from 720 to 1080, 1080 to 4K, now 4K to 8K, as consumers are downloading videos on their phones, the demand for broadband speeds, which is sort of this bottom chart, has gone from something like 4 megabits per second 4 gigabytes per month to something like 45. And so there's been a massive increase in the demand for broadband. And so just in terms of, Stephen, if we want to move to the next slide. In terms of 5G, just quickly in a nutshell, I know I hit on it earlier at the beginning of the call, but what is 5G? It's really sort of a small improvement in a few different things. So one of those things is small cells. So Tom Rutledge, who runs Charter, will tell you that what is 5G? It's a standard for smaller radios or smaller cells. So when we think about right now our homes, right, we're all essentially working off of our Wi-Fi networks right now. And even though we're all using the same spectrum, the spectrum being the means by which the data transfers over the air from the Wi-Fi router to the computer or the phone, even though we're all using the same spectrum, we are all in different locations, and so we're not impeding each other's broadband speeds. Whereas if everybody on this call were in my house right now, we would all be using the same router. So we would all be connecting our computers to the same router, and that would impede speeds. So the way you can think about some of the 5G change is really small cells, where historically we were all connected to the same tower when we were walking down the street in New York City. Now, if you have a small cell every couple hundred yards, each of us is connected to that small cell, or to the small cell that's right by us. So essentially, what that means is that when we were all connected to the tower, we were all degrading the speeds. When you densify a network and bring in so many more of these small cells, you're really improving speeds because each of us is using the spectrum associated with that particular small cell. And so that's, enhancing speeds and enhancing throughput. The next sort of benefit of 5G is really denser antennas. So those antennas are at the tower level and at the small cell level. And so, these dense antennas obviously have a lot of, like you can see from the chart, have a lot of small antennas on each, larger one. And on each of these small antennas, there's actually another antenna that then points in different directions. So this is called beamforming. And the idea is if the antenna is pointed more closely to you or directly at you, the signal is going to be stronger. So it's something like that. And you're going to see the wireless companies sort of do truck rolls to the towers to replace the antennas over time. So that's sort of a longer term, more expensive addition to getting a 5G. And then the last real way is more spectrum. And I think we talked about this earlier, where you have these spectrum bands that are now in the antenna in the iPhone. And so now that iPhone is 5G ready. And so that essentially means that, the spectrum, again, the means by which our phones talk to the towers, talk to our Wi-Fi routers, talk to small cells, the more of that we have, the greater the speeds. So in a nutshell, that's sort of what 5G is over time. And in terms of really building out all three of these facets of it, across the country, it'll take a lot of time. And so, I think in the next 3-4 years, you're going to see 5G really rolled out in NFL cities, but I think it's going to take another 5, 7, 8 years before, you have the applications that allow the ROI to exist in more rural areas for 5G. So that's sort of the evolution of it. Now, in terms of opportunities and how we're playing it, we really like cable. So we're invested in Charter and we're invested in Comcast, along with Lilac, which is a Latin American cable company. And so the reason we like these businesses is because cable actually has the largest infrastructure of coax and fiber in the ground around the country. So again, using the New York City example, if you're putting a small cell on every tower in New York, or excuse me, on every lamppost in New York, you're going to need, just like our Wi-Fi routers connect with an Ethernet port to, or a coaxial cable into the wall, you need to offload that data somehow. So when you have a small cell that's, sending data or receiving data from your phone, that needs to be connected to the hardwired network in some way. So we think this is an incremental revenue stream for cable because, it would take a lot of zoning and a lot of labor costs to dig up the streets of, big cities and put more fiber in. And then the other reason we like cable is really because it is a regional monopoly into the home. There's really nobody, except for, a few very densely populated areas. Cable effectively has the only pipe into the home that can get you to 1 gigabit per second, 5 gigabits, 10 gigabits. And, again, as higher compute functionality and 5G causes the consumer to, spend more time, doing virtual reality, augmented reality, watching, higher resolution movies at home. They're going to demand those higher speeds, and we think cable is effectively a utility stream. And the management teams at Charter and Lilac are very good. The next way we're playing it is in some of the new greenfield networks that are being built. And so what I would say was 5G is such a step function change in standard that when an AT&T or a Verizon is supporting a legacy 2G, 3G, 4G network, they really can't build out the software functionality mainly to do 5G the way that a greenfield operator can. And you saw this in India with Reliance. And when they launched their original new 4G, 5G network, two of their competitors went bankrupt because they were so aggressive with pricing. And you're seeing this with Rakuten in Japan. So, they've launched 5G pricing at a 35-40% discount to where the other carriers are offering 4G pricing. So we think they're going to disintermediate and take a lot of share in Japan. And then Dish Networks is looking to do the same thing over the next few years in the US. So we're, also involved in all three of those names between our different strategies. And then the last is really the semiconductor infrastructure. So, as you're rolling out this massive infrastructure, you need more chips. And so that's, very high-end chips that Taiwan Semiconductor, where we're invested, makes for, the new iPhones. And then, but it also involves some of the older chips that do power management because you're trying to increase voltage. And so because it's just a more efficient way to transmit electricity. And so, we have a couple companies in some of the different strategies that handle sort of voltage regulation. But that's kind of the way we're thinking about the telecom and media space right now, and, really what we like and how we're playing it.
That's great. Thanks, Nitin. Well, I know we might have different perspectives on this Zoom, so let's have a discussion. Any questions to Nitin or to Stephen on the transformations or specific?
Nitin, I have a question because it affects me and everything I do. How does 5G work in gaming? I have an understanding of how games work, but I feel like I lack the knowledge at this point in the back infrastructure of how 5G and these cable, especially Xfinity. Xfinity has been advertising a lot to esports. I'm looking at the advertising. How does that play into my sector?
So I would say that it enables more esports and more gaming because of the latency differences with 5G. So you're talking about when 5G is sort of fully rolled out between, each of these three parts to it, you're talking about 1 millisecond of latency versus call it 10 to 30 to 40 currently. And so I think obviously that means you can use wireless for gaming, which, you previously couldn't just given the latency issues. So I know, Netgear has a couple routers that are, expensive, very high-end routers that they market to the gaming community. And they say that's better latency. So I think 5G just makes latency a lot better. In terms of what Comcast is doing, I think it's, they obviously have a media business too. So I think some of it is just sort of, and Liberty's been doing this too. I think they bought a piece of an esports network also. So I think they just look at the consumer as, as shifting towards esports being a big demand driver. And so I think for them, it's just an addended service they sort of want to offer to the consumer. And John Malone's talked about that too, where he said esports is going to be a big phenomenon, and that's why we need higher throughput into the home.
That's amazing. If you can fix the latency, that'd be great. We use, to my dismay, we use mesh networking here, which I don't like that much. These XPods are not that great. So if you tell me 5G could make some better X5 pods, I'd be very happy.
Yeah, and again, I think that hits Wi-Fi too, right? So you're going to get better routers with better latency too.
Nitin, you touched on kind of the last mile solution, and I think that's a really important topic. Like just locally here, our whole city just spent the last 5 years undergrounding all of our power lines, which means that all the power poles are gone, which means there's no easy mount for all the 5G transmitters to get local access to that. So do you think that realistically that the solution is going to go to the cable guys?
Yeah, so I think that there's sort of two sides to fight.
Thing, but that's okay. Let me turn it down a sec. Hang on. No, I just
Go ahead.
So there are really two different sides to 5G. So there's sort of fixed 5G, which is competition to cable, right? Because what that would be is you have, a lamppost 1,000 feet away from an apartment, and that apartment then has a, transmitter inside it or right outside it. And then, that last mile connectivity is done wirelessly. There's a lot of reasons why I don't think that works because of sort of the physics of the type of spectrum you need and how small, the short distance of propagation of that spectrum that makes sort of the speeds that we're going to need, the 1 gigabit, 10 gigabit I was mentioning earlier, not viable for a fixed wireless offering. So then, so the next, so because of that, I think into the home, you're going to continue to see cable use that last mile. Now, I think where you see 5G is really on the wireless front, right? And so that's just adding these small cells everywhere, digging them into the ground first in NFL cities or anywhere where there's sort of fiber in the ground that you can connect up to the small cell. And so I think that's what sort of improves the density, again, in more highly population concentrated areas for 5G. In more rural areas, I think you're totally right. You're not going to, walk down the street in a small town with a low population density and, have lampposts connected with 5G. It's going to be on the towers. And so the speeds will be improved just because, you have these denser antennas I was talking about and you have more spectrum, but you're really only going to see, I think you're really only going to see those small cells in areas where it justifies the cost, if that makes sense.
How about globally? Who's ahead of the race here, and by how much? And how's this going to change? Maybe competitiveness.
I think so. I think the risk with everything and I can get into kind of the FCC policy around this, but in China, right, I mean, this is expensive, right, to build these things out, and I think that was part of the impetus for letting the Sprint T-Mobile merger go through, was that you would rather have 3 companies that are all strong rather than two very strong, 2 weak, just because the cost of 5G is so high, and so obviously scale matters, and so in China, where you have sort of one national 5G network being built, you can build that out cheaper, and you can build it out into to Bill's earlier question, you can build it out into the more rural areas and actually make it cost effective. So it's sort of like the way the tower model in the US went, where initially all the wireless guys were building their own towers and they realized, what's the point in all of us building towers? Let's just put it all into a tower company or multiple tower companies, and then let's all share towers. And so the point here is that I think you probably have some of the longer term efficiency benefits of 5G, call it the autonomous vehicles, where you bring your truck cost per ton mile down pretty substantially, even lower than where railroads are. Robo-taxis, where you bring your cost of transportation down pretty substantially. I think those types of efficiency gains remote machinery, robotics, all of that will maybe benefit China incrementally faster than us in terms of the global advantages. But I mean, I think we're building it out. The FCC is transitioning more and more spectrum, and so that piece of the puzzle ends up being a lot cheaper as we kind of take more satellite spectrum and repurpose it for terrestrial. So I think we're doing the right things. So that's not that I have a crystal ball into 5 years of policy into the future, but I feel like we're doing the right things on that front. In terms of other countries where you have private companies doing a great job, I think it's really the two networks I was talking about. I think Reliance is doing, and we're invested. They're doing a great job of sort of building an entire supply chain, essentially replicating Amazon. But then they also have this wireless network, and you saw, Silver Lake, KKR, Facebook, a bunch of other tech companies, Google, all invest in Reliance's network because they have strong relationships with the government too. And so they just see them as really benefiting from the digital transition in India. And I think Rakuten is really interesting in terms of what they're doing with a similar network and 5G in Japan.
Other questions?
Maybe sort of going off of that last one, the whole idea of, as I understand, sort of IoT, and also, again, as I understand, sort of autonomous vehicles. The premise is that you can't have widespread autonomous vehicles unless you have a deep and effective 5G network, because of all the the data transmissions going back and forth to control traffic flow. Similarly, all the benefits of IoT, same thing. So it sounds like from what you've described that a lot of this stuff is way off, and there are some very practical, perhaps not that sophisticated, technology that are barriers to seeing, IoT and autonomous and all that other stuff really, coming to fruition near term. Does that seem reasonable?
Yeah, I think you're totally right. I think it's also chicken and egg too, where as you have some of these addended services, that creates a new revenue stream for the wireless companies to build out to more rural areas. Because right now, if you're talking about just enabling somebody to walk down the street and surf videos faster, surf the internet faster, watch videos faster, that probably isn't enough to justify the spend. But again, I think, you start with denser antennas and you start with more spectrum and you get some improvements, you're sort of halfway there. And then I think that sort of starts enabling some of that technology. But I definitely think, you see it with all the autonomous vehicle trials that some of Waymo and so forth are doing, and I think they're definitely doing them in areas with higher quality networks that are already built out. So I think it sort of continues to drive, but again, I feel like we'll get there.
Mm-hmm.
Then is there an environmental cost to any of this?
That's a good question. I would think, and I don't have an answer to that. I haven't researched that. I would think, obviously when you're talking about more denser antennas, more power usage through small cells, even though small cells power levels are lower than towers, the radio networks, I would think it's just a lot greater energy usage. But, hopefully we're solving that problem in different ways, in other ways.
Well, thank you.
Other questions or perspectives? I know, Hank, you probably have a local perspective on your commercial or economic development in Phoenix, or Jeff in Korea, what you're seeing.
Yeah, Nitin, I'd love to hear your thoughts on, what you're seeing in the marketplace, or what you're hearing around the U.S.-China, issues around the U.S.-China trade, the consequent, blacklisting of Chinese companies, the impact around that. And then I've also been hearing about the potential blacklisting of U.S. companies from China's perspective. So I'd love to hear, winners, losers, ramifications.
Yeah, what I think is so interesting, I don't want to bore you with too much of the detail, but what I think is really interesting about these greenfield networks is the whole premise behind them is is initially you had this monopoly of wireless equipment. And so that was, call it Ericsson, Nokia, and Huawei, right? And so what that effectively was every tower had a small data center at the bottom, what Charlie Ergen calls, the shed at the bottom of the tower. And that shed was effectively, it was a data center. It had servers and it had storage. And so all of this compute functionality for a tower was done locally. And that was sort of a closed loop between the software and the hardware of these three companies. And so what Reliance did first, and they were the first company to do this, was they went to the makers of the hardware and they got them, the people that Nokia would buy the white labeled hardware from, and they got them to sell them the hardware directly. And then they went to different software companies and asked them to design software in the data center. And so the idea is that 5G, when we talk about latency, we talk about speeds, is so much faster that you don't need to have the server and the storage at the base of the tower. And so you can put that in the data center. And then when you put that in the data center, you're effectively decoupling the hardware from the software, and you're going with different vendors for one versus the other. Now, the reason I mention all of that detail is because I think it really changes the market. And, you might know this already, but Jeff, but I think what you see in Korea is Samsung is starting to win some designs on the hardware front, and Qualcomm is too. And so they're effectively disintermediating that monopoly that those three companies had. And I think that's something Charlie Ergen has pushed in the US and has lobbied for, because his take on it is, we don't need to use Huawei now. So I think that change in the industry kind of has really helped companies sort of not have this dependence on Huawei for the cheapest equipment, and it also keeps Nokia and Ericsson from raising prices on these 5G networks. So I would say that's one way. In terms of other stuff around just sort of what's going on with the Huawei ban. We think it's a positive for TSM, unless China invades Taiwan, but we think it's a positive for TSM just because, when the semi-cap equipment doesn't go to China, that means that it's less likely that they're really going to start building leading edge semiconductor capacity. We think it's a positive for Qualcomm because, you've seen rumors about Huawei effectively now selling its smartphone division. And so that sort of helps on Qualcomm's ability to kind of sell into other foreign, cell phone makers other than Huawei or outside of China. In terms of the other side of the ban, I'm not as current on sort of the winners and losers there. And if China starts blacklisting U.S. companies, do they have the expertise at sort of that leading edge to, do what they want to do? I'm not totally sure. But from everything I've seen, the real sort of leading edge 7 nanometer, 5 nanometers is coming from just a couple companies.
And they're not Chinese, Nitin.
Yeah.
Nitin, can you touch on, one of your companies does a lot of work in Latin America and South America, and particularly the subsea cable connections that they're putting to get things going down there, because I think it's a pretty interesting story.
Yeah, so like Stephen mentioned, we are invested in Liberty Latin America, LILAC. And so this is a business where they own cable and wireless companies in Chile, Puerto Rico, Panama, the Bahamas, Jamaica, Costa Rica, for the most part, are their largest, Barbados are their largest markets. And this is just a phenomenal, management team. John Malone is obviously the largest shareholder. And what they're doing is they own, like Stephen said, they own the only undersea fiber cable between Miami, the Caribbean, Central and South America. And they are effectively rolling up a lot of small cable and wireless operators in their footprint, and owning the undersea cable lowers their cost of delivering service. And they're very thoughtful about leverage, and so they're sort of levering up either at the holdco level or in sort of taking a new cable company in Costa Rica, for example, merging it with another company where they already own operations, and then they can access the capital markets more efficiently than the company that they're buying, usually because it's small and unlevered. And so that generates a huge levered return for them. So they've been buying companies for, call it, something like $3, and that generate $1 in levered free cash flow. And so again, this is a business where it's in a bunch of markets. The synergy value of making these acquisitions is really high, and as they continue to build and grow the business, it's $11, $10.50 stock right now. We think they're going to do something like $2 in free cash flow per share next year. We think, that's going to be $3 in 2022. And we think that, organically you're growing free cash flow at 20 to 25% as broadband demand increases in these sort of frontier and emerging markets. And then on top of that, you're making these acquisitions that add another 30 to 50 cents in free cash flow per year. And so pretty soon, within 4 years, you're up to $4 to $5. And so we really think this $10 stock could be, $50. This is the only stock that John Malone has bought in the open market since 2012. And, management is, we're very close to the CEO and CFO, and, I spent time with them in Denver, pre-COVID. We just think they're a great team. We think they have great local management teams. I think this is sort of if anybody's read The Outsiders, I think this is kind of that next really good management team that's going to build a pretty incredible business over time. I don't know if there's anything else to add, Stephen, that you think.
I think that covers it, but it's just it's everywhere, and this is going to be we think this is the enabling technology, as Bill pointed out. Autonomous driven cars don't work very well with latency. You need to have this to drive AI data centers and all that, because the amount of data that's going to be downloaded even going forward is ratcheting up. So 5G standards and getting that going is going to be critical. And as Bill pointed out, getting the last mile is absolutely essential. So thanks, Nitin. And Mark, if you have any other questions.
Well, since we have others on the phone from other countries too, I'm just curious what you're seeing or any perspectives. Again, Hank, you might have a local perspective. You wrote that in the chat about the $12 billion investment in Phoenix, just getting a lot of, is like often the lower cost of effective manufacturing. But anyone else, maybe Mark Jarvis in London, what you're seeing with 5G or otherwise?
This is not my space, unlike yourself, Mark, but I thought today was fascinating, a very exciting update, especially when talking about New York and the cabling, with all the mini towers everywhere. And it's something, we're moving very slowly here in the UK with 5G. So I don't really have an intellectual question, I'm afraid, but fascinating presentation.
Hey, Mark, this is Hank, and I'll make it real brief. Yeah, it's fascinating. I think that we're looking at 5G, more from the, at the manufacturing side, where we're trying to see things, like higher speed on the shop floor, reduced latency, and connectivity reliability, which is going to make, manufacturing for a lot of things, whether we're producing the autonomous vehicles that we're going to be producing for Lucid, or the hydrogen trucks for Nikola that'll be made here. But then on the autonomous vehicle side, it was a very important comment that was just made. We've got several last mile delivery companies. So this is a different last mile where people are trying to solve in an urban environment where you don't have these trucks running around and making multiple stops, and you do that. So many of these last mile delivery companies are now trying to utilize ground-based autonomous vehicles, small drones that drive up to your house to deliver a package, airborne drones. And that whole network is going to need something like 5G to work. It won't work on 4G. And the testing that we've seen, the limited testing that we've seen, The 5G network that we have is probably not where it needs to be to make this a reality, but I see that being particularly important as more and more companies come into this market to test that product and that technology.
And I saw recently in I think it was in the Times here, but the UK government military is spending a lot of money on these baby drones, which are going to be supporting soldiers on the ground to take the first hit. Maybe not the right word, but you know what I mean. And that's going to really drive technological advances, isn't it?
Yeah,
Chas,
and
I saw you come onto the screen here. You want to make a comment, Chas Walker? You're on mute though.
This is tremendously fascinating. I'm in Atlanta, and of course we are seeing 5G deployments in various hotspots in the city, downtown, midtown, Buckhead, of course, and then in some of the, I think, closer end suburbs are building out fairly rapidly. We've also seen Google Fiber here, and I don't know if Google Fiber is, I know they're pushing the content side for the consumer. I don't know if they are a competitor for cable on the backhaul side. That would be an interesting question for Nitin. And then the question that was really buzzing for me in listening to this presentation was really about leapfrogging. And if we look at the history of technology leapfrogging, particularly in telecom, it had a huge economic impact on emerging and frontier markets, that leapfrogging. And so with respect to 5G, is there an economic case for frontier and emerging markets to basically maybe, because a lot of them are deploying 4G, so they're behind, even further behind than a lot of I think U.S. markets, for that matter, that are still deploying 4G. Should those markets be considering 5G leapfrog? Is the technology there? Is the cost benefit? Is the economics there?
So it's interesting because I totally agree with you. And I think emerging markets definitely should be shifting to wireless because they don't have that, like you said, they don't have that embedded infrastructure in the ground for fast connections. So we're invested in a satellite company called EchoStar, and EchoStar, Charlie Ergen founded the company.
I remember EchoStar.
Oh, really? Okay.
From my Wilson days, that's been around a long time.
Oh, really? Yeah. So, so basically, Charlie, Dish Networks, he spun EchoStar out of Dish, and so EchoStar owns these satellites, and the satellites are high throughput. When I say high throughput, if you're a consumer, friend of mine with a place in the Catskills, he has internet from them, and it's 25 megabits per second. But satellite internet is the only thing he can get. So that's effectively their business model. But the interesting thing, and the reason I bring it up, is because in the U.S. it's used just for super rural areas where we don't have access to cable or fiber. But in Brazil, where they also have a satellite, they actually compete with all of the telecom companies because 15 to 20 megabits per second is really fast. And so I think what you're going to see are elements of 5G and wireless in those countries. It's not going to be lightning fast 5G with amazing latency like here, but it's going to be in places where, you can use sort of 5G equipment and spectrum, and you can get something faster than, the copper that might be running in the ground. And so I think that's where you'll start to see more, wireless, I would say even more broadly than 5G, wireless, but better spectral efficiency from 5G in some of those markets. And I think that'll enable broadband penetration. And Lilac, like Steve and I were just talking about, they're talking about that in some of their markets where they also own the wireless companies, and they're going to use wireless because that satisfies the demand of consumers there. So I think you'll see big improvements and, like you said, step function changes in broadband speeds, which I think in certain emerging markets, that's helpful for distance learning and so forth. But but I think that's where you'll start to see wireless enable, better broadband connectivity.
And so does 5G require fiber backhaul?
5G requires fiber backhaul for the highest latency and the best throughput. You can use 5G spectrum, you can use 5G towers and get better spectral efficiency. So that's bits per hertz than 4G. And in those cases, your constraint is the backhaul. So to your point, if you have fiber and, like Charlie Ergen says, that fiber is connected to every tower in the US, which is why they can do these, they can put the software in the tower, in the data center. That enables ultra fast latency. But in emerging markets where you're going to have satellite backhaul, so one of EchoStar's big new businesses is the same thing. It's towers that are not connected to fiber, coax, or copper. They need the satellite to do that backhaul. And so you're constrained by the speeds of the satellite. But again, that's gonna get you to your 20 to 30 megabits per second for consumers in those countries, but it's not going to get you to the gig per second that we're talking about for 5G in the US.
Okay, final question, if I may, Mark.
Yeah.
So for investors in tower assets, 5G with the microcells, you're still talking about denser antennas or radios on the towers. And so for tower owners, what should tower owners anticipate with the rollout of 5G in terms of their economics?
So you're seeing AMT, basically American Tower, basically say that they will roll out small cells in areas where they think it's economically viable. So I think this goes back to the whole sort of NFL City point and your point that you're seeing them in kind of the the higher socioeconomic and the denser areas of Atlanta. I think it's the same thing where the tower guys, or where the economics work, the tower guys will roll out small cells. And I think the tower economics won't change much because, it's up to the wireless guys to do the truck roll, to change the antennas. I don't think, I think we still need every single tower out there. We still need, all these small cells to handle all the demand. But I think that's where, again, this comes back to the point on China versus the US. Hopefully what we'll see is the areas where it doesn't make economic sense for the tower guys to set up small cells. Hopefully we see some sort of subsidies, subsidy set up to make that cost effective for the carriers to put their base stations on those small cells.
If I could add, Nitin, just in where we're going with the overall infrastructure for the U.S., this is a area that's ripe for public-private partnerships to serve the unserved or underserved much better.
And we're seeing that, of course, play out with remote learning.
Yep.
And the differentials in access latency It's really an issue here in the Metro Atlanta area.
It's part of the societal transformation that I was talking about, because the education element of it is where the equality of opportunity starts, and how we manage that needs a much more thoughtful approach, and one that is very dangerous right now with the idea of going after our technological champions and alienating them at a time we probably need to pull them closer to the government to do more to work together. So it's a fine line of, are they getting too far over their skis versus are they adding as much social good as others think they can, and how do you get the best of both? And I think it's a very important topic for policymakers going forward to find the right balance between these public-private partnerships to serve or underserved.
I'm
Thanks,
curious,
Art.
I'm sorry. In terms of the, like using a baseball analogy, in terms of the opportunity set, what inning do you think we're in transition to 5G and the ability to kind of that upward trajectory?
I think we're really early on. And I think that's why you're seeing it just in sort of these dense urban areas. we are invested in a couple of satellite businesses. I think that 5G isn't the play, the reason we're invested, but we look at it as sort of, to the earlier question, as in sort of addended revenue stream as you get to 5G in rural areas. But I don't think that happens for, 4 or 5+ years.
Joe, I'd also point out that if you recall, I've talked about the third wave that Steve Case has highlighted. And the second wave of that was the app and mobility wave, which really started in 2000, but didn't hit its stride until 2007 when the first iPhone came out. Google was starting to hit its stride, and Hadoop allowed us to structure data better. And I think these tech evolutions have a big startup phase, and then all of a sudden it clicks in and it takes off. And I think we're going through a similar thing in 5G right now, where you're building the base for it and getting the infrastructure in place and sorting out. And then all of a sudden, you're going to see an acceleration of activity and it become integrated in a way that we are talking about imagining, but can't imagine where we are.
Well, just for talking with the governor of Ohio, we have a lot of emerging parts of our state and our country, right? In rural America. You were making some points, Hank, about rural Arizona. So it'd be interesting. These, Jess, as you were saying, I know you spent some time focused on Africa. Do I remember that correct? So obviously, and I come from Russia. We've seen, for some reason, Russia. You take the subway in Russia, you get perfect connection. You could probably do esports down there. We can't get it in New York City. So there's all.
Good idea for an event.
Yeah.
No, I'm kidding.
But anyway,
a country like Nigeria, which is the largest country in Africa, population-wise and GDP, there's fiber that's been underutilized. The national telco was privatized some 4 or 5 years ago, and it's just I've looked at several companies in Nigeria who've come from the outside. One of the I don't know if it was Reliance, but one of the Indian telcos were big in Nigeria. One of the Middle Eastern telcos was also huge. And so broadband is there, but in terms of the implementation of a full national network and system that economy is deserving of, it just seems like there's a huge opportunity here that maybe I'm missing something on that one. But a country that size, very young population, it seems like there's huge upside.
your microphones.
Yeah.
But by the way, we were talking a couple weeks ago about SPACs, and if you haven't met, Christophe Charlier is looking at launching a SPAC, like a 250 million size to buy a sizable business in Africa. Sounds like an infrastructure play. Could be one of the targets, and he knows it because he was like the head of business development for Megaphone, which is this big telco there. It's Mark Jarvis, you may remember.
Maybe you can connect us, Mark.
Yep. And by the way, I have an app where you can.
What about the
you can all connect.
region? Because I've read that Amazon is moving to Bahrain and building server spaces in Bahrain. Is there a model there? Not that they're emerging by any means, but it's a place where they're, in my opinion, they are leapfrogging. I don't know what your opinion is on the MENA region, but it's of great interest to me because we see a lot of value there.
Was that a question?
It was a question of what I'm seeing is Amazon is trying to move to Bahrain with more server space. Do you think the MENA region, specifically the KSA, are they going to leapfrog into 5G first in that area, or is there another location in the MENA region that is more primed for better connectivity?
If I may, on that one, Mark, my belief is that the UAE.
Okay.
will steal the march or is already stealing the march on the other members of the GCC. And as we come down into MENA, I like Morocco.
Okay.
And I'd say they are probably going to be one of the leaders. But then, quite frankly, as you move into West Africa and Morocco and Francophone Africa are really starting to look like one economic region. And so as a result, Orange out of France is being very aggressive in terms of tying together the region, both in terms of wireless and to some degree on the fiber side. Morocco, I think there's a lot of upside in Morocco.